This week's On Story, prolific producer Lauren Schuler shares her experience launching storied franchises and iconic films.
I showed X-Men to Bill Mechanic, who was still head of the studio, and Bill said, the third act doesn't work. And as he said it, it hit me. It's funny, sometimes you don't ever know until somebody else points it out to you. He was right. And I knew why, because it wasn't personal. Because to the audience, those were nameless, faceless people that this wave of the virus was going to go on to. And we needed to make it personal.
This week on Story, producer Lauren Schuler shares her experiences shaping legendary films. Donner details launching the storied X-Men franchise, standing up for her story convictions, and producing the beloved family film Free Willy.
I'll tell you what my very first movie was. It was Mr. Mom. And that was because, thank you, I liked it too. Good old John Hughes. So I read, John Hughes wrote for the National Lampoon. I read an article of his, and I thought it was really funny. I was able to get a hold of John Hughes. We bonded because John is from Chicago and I'm from Cleveland, and both of our fathers had troubles in business, and we kind of really bonded on the phone. I asked him, I pitched a project to him. He didn't want to do it. He was working on something else, asked me to come onto that. And we used to talk every day. And at night, the guy never slept. And one night he's telling me about his taking care of the house. His wife had gone to Arizona. He was in charge of the two boys in the house. And I swear, he had never done a domestic anything in his life. He had 3 sisters. He must have married Nancy, his wife, right after college because he was an idiot. Not in the world, but in life. And so, he had me in stitches. And so he said, I have like 80 pages in a drawer called Mr. Mom. Would you read it? I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Gave him some notes. In a week, he had the full draft. He came out of advertising. That's why he wrote so fast. And during that time, I had a project at Warner Brothers, and the executive who I was working with gave me a script as a writing sample, and it was called Lady Hawk, and it was written by a guy named Ed Kamara. And I read it, and I went, I want to make this movie. I'll get somebody else to write my other project. And very, very long story. I was eventually able to convince Richard Donner to direct it. And it took a long time to get it made. Meantime, Mr. Mom went. And then finally, we made Lady Hawk.
That's a really great kismet story that these 2 things happened to happen, or 3 things happened at the same time. These 2 really awesome films, 2 on my favorite list. And Richard Donner. So keep going.
All right. So then after Lady Hawk, I came back, and Joel Schumacher, you remember him, he approached me. He had a script called St. Elmo's Fire, and he asked if I would produce it. And then John Hughes came knocking and said, I have a script called Pretty in Pink. And I did Pretty in Pink. And then I was pretty much on my way. I had established myself as a successful producer. And I just did a ton of movies after that.
Mr. Mom was the one I was going to start with because that, to me, is one of the almost perfect comedies.
It was John and I. We were young. We developed it on the phone. He would fax you pages all hours of I'm telling you, the man never slept. 24/7, you had to change. 2 seconds later, it was, it was done and done well. With John, the general concept was terrific. Everything was terrific. But there was too many neighbors involved and kind of got rid of that a little bit. I remember we had discussions about Terry's job. I'm not sure if the wife was working at that point. Maybe we were just noodling around.
Butler, you're a sportsman. I was kind of counting on you to take part in this. Spouses are eligible.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, come on. Nobody takes it seriously. It's just good, clean fun.
I know, Ron. Normally I'd say yeah, but I'll tell you, we gotta get over to see Carolyn's Aunt Emily. She's
sick.
Dying.
Dead.
Well, why don't you stick around for a few minutes anyway, and you can watch with the rest of the wives. I'm sorry, I mean families.
Yeah. Tell you what, Boys, run down to the car and get Dad's sweatpants and shoes and stuff out.
Hey. All right.
I'll stick around for a while.
Okay.
So Free Willy was written by a guy named Keith Walker. He was an actor on Goonies, and he gave the script to Dick. Had a woman with him, a producer, Jenny Lutugan, and it was about a kid who was a mute and maybe deaf. I'm not sure, but he lived with nuns, and it was all very sweet until he let Willie go at the end, and he said his first word, Willie, which was really too saccharine. And Dick had a hard time, and one day he just sort of threw it across the room at me and said, "Here, fix this." And so I read it, and I said, it's boring. And you have to make this kid interesting. Let's make him a bad kid. Let's make him a bad kid who was in and out of juvenile hall. Let's make it a bad whale. Let's make him Free Willy a bad whale. It was like causing all kinds of trouble at the park. So now we have a bad kid and bad whale. I'm interested, right?
These were not the circumstances you described to me when I signed on.
You're a professional, right? So make it work. Al's given me a line, and I am not going to cross it.
This is not about crossing lines.
Which words don't you understand? Look, if the whale was to bring in customers, then we could spend some money on it. But since he's not, you're just going to have to make do with what you've got. Easy, son. Untie those back lines! What's going on? Randall, what happened?
I don't know. The net came loose.
So now we're casting, and actors are coming in for the role of the father. And Michael Madsen comes in. He was in Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs. Thank you. And I go, that's it. Bad kid, bad whale, bad dad. I love it. Now we had a movie.
Let's move to a few others. Get pulled into Dave from an early point so that you're actually developing that story. And clearly it's a movie you love. And working with Ivan Reitman and Gary Ross, I mean, there's a kind of dream team. And he said that this idea, he thought it was ridiculous. But he was happy that you were interested in it. But so you guys went forward and made a movie that, even though it has something that was really kind of risky about whether it would work or not, right? Like, he looked that much like the president, but it did work, right? And it was a very popular film. So I'd love to hear the way you guys started working on that together and what you all each brought to it.
I asked Ivan to shake it up a bit, to change his crew, to make this I love Twins. I love Ghostbusters. I love his movies. But I wanted to make it different. I mean, the only way that Dave could work is if you base it as much in reality as possible. If you made it silly, you would never buy that this guy passed as a president. And one of the ways that we based it in reality was that we brought in real pundits, real journalists, real, not tastemakers, but in essence, real news people. The only time we ever broke that, and we didn't break it, was having Oliver Stone be the only one who thought, wait a minute, that's not the president.
I want to take a look at Bill Mitchell's proposal to see how he intends to pay for it.
It's a little bit like the program I presented when I ran for president 4 years ago.
Has the president taken leave of his faculties? I ask you, Eleanor Cliff.
This is the definition of modern leadership. You set out a bold goal and you don't say how you're going to get there.
They tried this in Russia and they wrecked the damn country. I wonder if the communists will get a hold of them.
If you look at a photograph of Bill Mitchell taken before the stroke and one right after, you will see distinct differences.
Are you saying this is a conspiracy?
Yes, I am saying this is a conspiracy.
Do you think you're a little paranoid, Oliver?
No. Have you compared the photographs?
Oliver.
Larry?
Oliver.
As long as you're on the same team, as long as you want what's best for the movie, difficult because the studio these days wants you to be their as a producer, wants you to be their partner and do their bidding. And the director, as when I started, I used to partner with the director and try to get their vision to the screen until I started working with a director or two that I didn't agree with them. And then I learned my name goes on the screen too, and I had to just trust my gut. And I'm willing to be wrong. I'm willing to be in a room with the director and the writer that I respect to weigh it out and to see what it needs to be.
I'm going to go back to Lady Hawk because it was, when it came out, it was an incredible film. But that film, you know, that's a risky film. What a crazy concept. They're never, almost ever in the film together. And you
never make that today. It is a risky film. And I'll tell you, we sold it to, Warner's, and Warner's split it with Fox. I think one of them distributed it domestically and the other distributed it foreign, and that's a lot of times what you do. I mean, if you go to set up your film and it's too expensive, first of all, try to get the budget down, and then second of all, you maybe bring in some financing, and if you can lower their risk, that always helps. But we just plowed ahead and made the movie we believed in.
I asked her if I was dreaming. She said I was. I'm not insane. You must believe me when I tell you these things.
No, I believe you. I believe in dreams.
I see.
This lady, does she perhaps have a name?
Not that she mentioned. Why?
Well, she might wander into my dreams. Wouldn't it be nice if I could call her by name and pretend we met before?
I want to get to X-Men just because it's a franchise, and that's
a lot of development on this. You know, Fox didn't know what they had. They did when they bought it. Bill Mechanic bought it. But by the time it came around to the second one, they made the second one because the first one was such a big hit. But except for Bill Mechanic, who bought it, these guys hadn't read a comic book. They didn't know. I would bring Kevin in a meeting with me, or Avi Arad, who ran up Marvel, and the head of the studio would say, "Get them out of here. What do we need them for?" Because they were Marvel, you know.
Well,
Kevin wasn't Marvel. Kevin was with me.
So in that film, so you're breaking new ground in many ways, right? I mean, obviously Superman and Batman had been around in various forms, but you're definitely breaking new ground, and you're developing that from the start, and you're having to really think about, without the knowledge that Marvel is going to become this 800-pound gorilla, that you actually, how will the audience accept this? And obviously Bryan Singer wrote that, or was involved in that first, right, in the first one. At what point did you get all this team together, and what were the ups and downs of trying to get the right people into the project?
It was really hard. We had to build the world. We had to explain who the X-Men were, who the Brotherhood of Mutants were, why they had powers, what the world thought of them, what Xavier's School for the Gifted was, and each character, and move forward with the story the whole time. And we were writing up to the end, to the very end, which is not the right way to make a movie. But unfortunately, that's how we had, and keep it down to a budget. So, which actually, when I looked at it last night, and I thought, wow, that was a lot of bang for your buck, because we only had $90 million to make that movie.
That's nothing today.
Yeah, you're not kidding. So it was hard. It was really, really hard. And have a love story in it, and focus on the characters, which is really what the reason any movie does well is because there are good characters in it.
You running again?
Yeah, not really. Got some things to take care of up north.
I kind of like it. I don't want you to go.
I'll be back for this.
I went to see the movie, which is a movie I might not have normally gone to see, and I loved it. I just so loved it. And I loved it because of the characters. And I also loved it because of the structure.
Here's an interesting, yes, we got there. I mean, it was, there's just so many ideas. There was such a wealth of comics that we could pull from, and we wanted an origin story, and every character has their origin story. So there was so much to pull from. And then somewhere along the way, because of the studio, because of I don't know why, a lot of the comic got thrown out the window, which is too bad, but we did manage to pull in a structure. I learned the greatest lesson on X-Men because the original script had Magneto, the bad guy. And by the way, here's one thing about that Brian did. I've got to give him a lot of credit. When you have a villain, always understand why the villain is a villain. So what Brian did was Magneto's character, he came out of the Holocaust. Okay, he was Jewish, came out of the Holocaust, was separated from his parents. He saw the evil that humans did. And therefore, he hated humans. In order to understand that, Brian came up with an idea, and God bless the studio let us do it because it's a really dark scene. The very first scene is young Magneto with his parents, black and white, raining in mud at somewhere like Auschwitz, where he's, where they're grabbed apart and the gates are closed and he's thrown away. And he starts pulling, oh, no, I want my parents. But because the powers come along often at trauma around age 13, you see the gates start pulling towards him, and then they hit him, and they hit him on the head, and they hit him down. So you understand as a kid why he has such hatred of humans and their fear of mutants and the mutant powers. So now, end of the movie, Magneto's plan is to unleash this virus onto a big gathering at Ellis Island. We filmed that, cut it, we showed it to Bill Mechanic, who was still head of the studio, and Bill said, the third act doesn't work. And as he said it, it hit me. It's funny, sometimes you don't ever know until somebody else points it out to you. He was right. And I knew why, because it wasn't personal. Because to the audience, those were nameless, faceless people that this wave of the virus was going to go on to. And we needed to make it personal. And so we decided it would be about Logan rescuing Rogue. Now, Magneto was using Rogue in order to transmit his powers, because that's what Rogue does. She could take your powers. And so Logan had to rescue her or else she would be killed. Now it's personal. We care about Rogue, and we see in the movie Logan cares about Rogue. Now it's personal. Now we have stakes. Now we care. So we refilmed, reshot some of those scenes, and suddenly it worked. And I've carried that with me all, from that point on, always to make sure that the ending is personal.
I'm going to go back to the beginning because I also think one of the things that first one did really well was that first scene, which is a magnificent opening scene, period, right? And then the next two. Now we know what's up with Rogue, right? And she's a key character all the way to the end. And then the third scene is the mutant Senate hearing. Now, I don't need to read the comic book, right? So to me, that was the part that was done so beautifully to connect an audience that was not your IP audience, right?
Trying to get Wolverine's origins was always there because he was always a key character, and Brian had an affinity for Rogue, which was good. So that brought her to the forefront. And tying them together was a good idea. I mean, that did not come from the comics. It just came from him liking her. We tried many different stories, but that was the one that seemed to have more resonance for us.
So part of your job is a constant dissection.
Yes, constant dissection. Does it work? Does this work? You know, and especially with this is a different situation because you have a canon of stories. And in something like this where there was a whole canon, you do want to go with the favorite characters, the bigger characters, and then eventually open the door to some of the not as popular characters. And we really didn't, I mean, they honestly didn't know. Marvel knew. Marvel wanted us to do well so they could do Spider-Man. And I had a big fight with Brian about tone because it was very serious to him. First of all, you need humor. Even if how serious you are, you need humor or they're going to laugh at something else. And second of all, you have this character, Wolverine, and part of his charm, part of the reason he's so loved is that he's irreverent and irreverent in his humor. And you want to see that that's the guy you like. And Joss Whedon had done a pass. 8 million people did a pass for us, but Joss Whedon did a pass. And he had this one scene where Wolverine gets in a fight with a similar Wolverine, with Mystique, who is, looks like Wolverine. And he comes out and Cyclops says, "How do I know it's you?" And Wolverine looks at him and he goes, "You're a and now he knows it's him because they didn't get along. So, and I had to fight Brian and fight him to shoot that. And then he shot it anyway. It's my favorite scene in the film.
Hey, it's me.
Prove it.
You're a
Okay.
You're working, what your role is really in working with writers and also working with the studio and how you help protect the writer, but also how you sometimes have to lead the writer down a different path and find your way to get there. How do you become this sort of Switzerland or diplomat in the process?
I mean, that's a part of a producer's role is to figure out how do you negotiate with people. First thing I always try was humor. If that didn't work, I would plead or negotiate. I'd say, to the director, just shoot it. And we could always cut it out in the editing room. And if that didn't work, I would just yell and scream. I mean, and that always worked.
That note, for instance, you just talked about in X-Men. I mean, that could have gone either way, right? You could have thought, you're wrong, we shot it, that's what we're doing.
Okay, so in X-Men 3, there was a cure for mutancy that the government develops. And the director and the studio wanted Rogue to get the cure. And her to want the cure. And I said, you're out of your mind. The whole thing is about mutant pride, and we're different and we're mutants. And now you want one of the main characters to say, I don't want this anymore. This is wrong.
How do you know you're right?
That's the question, isn't it? It really is. You just have to trust your gut. You just have to think, was this keeping me up at night? And, this is something I put a lot of time and effort into and love, this movie, and my name goes on it, and I feel really strongly. Again, I can't emphasize enough, pick your fights. But, you just at a certain point decide this is big. And I really believe this, and I know I'm right, and you get out there and you fight. And the stakes are high, because if you really hold your ground, sometimes you get taken off the project. I go through the same thing. I fight the studios on your behalf, on the project's behalf, on casting, on all these different things, and I too risk getting removed, even at my stage. I've butted heads and been thrown off things, and it's really hard to know when to take a stand.
You've been watching a conversation with Lauren Schuler Donner on Story. On Story is part of a growing number of programs in Austin Film Festival's On Story project that also includes the On Story radio program, podcast, book series, and the On Story archive, accessible through the Whitliff Collections at Texas State University. To find out more about On Story and Austin Film Festival, visit onstory.tv or austinfilmfestival.com.